A millionaire threw money on the floor to humiliate the waitress and said, "Take this and buy better clothes. You reek of poverty." But what she said left everyone speechless. Tyler Donovan adjusted the cuff of his custom-made suit as he stepped into the grand dining hall of La Belle Époque, his most prestigious restaurant in New York City. The chandeliers cast a golden glow over the elite clientele, the sound of crystal glasses clinking blending harmoniously with the soft murmur of classical music. This was his world, one of power, wealth, and control. "Mr. Donovan," a waiter greeted him with a nervous bow. "Your table is ready." Tyler barely acknowledged the man, as he strode confidently toward the best seat in the house. Every head in the room turned as he passed. Some nodded in admiration, others in fear. He had built his empire from the ground up, turning a single restaurant into a nationwide luxury chain. Now, no one dared question him, except for incompetence. That he had no patience for. The evening was supposed to be flawless, a gathering of investors, top-tier executives, and socialites, people who mattered. But Tyler's mood soured the moment he realized his wine glass was empty. He lifted a finger, expecting immediate attention. Several waiters moved like shadows across the room, but none reached him fast enough. His gaze narrowed in irritation. Finally, a young waitress approached, too slowly for his liking. Her uniform was crisp but simple, and unlike the polished, artificial smiles of other staff, hers was neutral, almost indifferent. "Sir, what can I get you?" Tyler didn't bother looking at the menu. "A Chateau Margaux, and be quick about it." "Of course," she replied evenly, but something about her tone annoyed him. It wasn't disrespectful, but it lacked the usual deference he was used to. Minutes passed. Tyler's irritation grew as he drummed his fingers against the polished table. Across from him, one of the investors chuckled. "Getting slow service in your own restaurant, Donovan." A few others smirked. Tyler clenched his jaw. When the waitress finally returned with his wine, he barely let her set it down before speaking, his voice laced with disdain. "Tell me, do you usually take this long, or is this just some special incompetence for tonight?" The room quieted. A few executives exchanged knowing glances, clearly enjoying the show. They had seen Tyler humiliate employees before. It was practically entertainment. The waitress, however, didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze and said, "I brought your wine, sir." The way she said it, without apology, without shame, set something off in Tyler. He smirked coldly and reached into his wallet. Pulling out a few $100 bills with deliberate cruelty, he let them fall to the floor. "Take this," he said. "Buy yourself a better uniform. You reek of poverty." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Some guests tried to suppress their amusement, while others exchanged glances, waiting for the young woman to break, to stammer an apology, to scramble for the money. But she did none of those things. Instead, she simply looked at the money on the floor, then back at Tyler. Her expression remained unreadable, but her next words sent a chill through the room. "I don't need your money," she said. Her voice calm then. Without breaking eye contact, she added, "In fact, tomorrow morning, I'll be buying this company." Silence. Then, laughter. It started as a chuckle from one of the investors, then spread across the room like wildfire. "That's rich," someone muttered. Tyler smirked, shaking his head in amusement. "You, buy my company." The young woman simply picked up the empty tray from the table. "Enjoy your wine, Mr. Donovan." And with that, she walked away. Tyler barely gave it another thought. To him, it was nothing more than an empty boast, an attempt at pride from someone who had no idea how the real world worked. The rest of the night carried on without incident, but for some reason, her words lingered in the back of his mind. The morning after the next morning, Tyler was awoken by the persistent buzzing of his phone. Groggy, he reached for it and saw dozens of missed calls from his executive team. His brows furrowed. He swung his legs out of bed and checked his emails. Then he froze. An urgent message from his CFO read, "Call me. It's an emergency. The company has been sold." Tyler's breath hitched. His mind struggled to process the words. Sold. That was impossible. He owned the majority shares. How could anyone have bought him out overnight? His phone buzzed again. It was his assistant. "Sir," she said in a panicked voice, You need to get to the office. There's been a... Before she could finish, another email popped up on his screen. Official press release. Westwood Holdings acquires Donovan Enterprises. A chill ran down his spine. He scrolled further, his hands shaking slightly. Effective immediately, all Donovan Enterprises assets have been transferred to new ownership under Haley Westwood. The name hit him like a brick. No, this couldn't be real. His mind flashed back to the night before. The waitress, her words, "Tomorrow morning, I'll be buying this company." Tyler bolted out of bed. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Fear. Tyler stormed into the headquarters of Donovan Enterprises, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. His mind refused to accept the words he had read just moments ago. Westwood Holdings acquires Donovan Enterprises. It had to be a mistake, a sick joke. As he shoved past the reception desk, the employees, people who once cowered at his presence, were now whispering, exchanging looks that he couldn't quite decipher. When he reached his office, he found his executive board already assembled around the conference table. Their expressions tense, eyes avoiding his. His CFO, Richard Lane, stood up as Tyler entered. "Tyler?" Richard started cautiously. Tyler slammed his fist against the glass wall. "What the hell is going on?" The tension in the room thickened. No one spoke. Richard exhaled and adjusted his tie, clearly dreading this moment. "As of this morning, Donovan Enterprises no longer belongs to you. The majority shares were acquired overnight by Westwood Holdings. The deal was finalized before the markets opened." Tyler's hands clenched into fists. "That's impossible. I control the board. I own the majority." "You did," Richard corrected. "But the moment you used company stock as collateral for your expansion plans last year, you opened the door. They waited for the right time to strike." Tyler's jaw tightened. He remembered now. The loans, the calculated risk, the temporary release of certain shares. It was supposed to be controlled. But now, it was gone. "They played you, Tyler," Richard said bluntly. "And they played you brilliantly." A slow chill crept down Tyler's spine. "Who's behind this?" Richard hesitated. "You already know." The answer hit him before Richard could even say it. Haley Westwood. The name tasted foreign in his mouth. Yet it shouldn't have. He should have recognized it immediately. He should have known that last night wasn't a coincidence. "That girl," he muttered. But Richard cut him off. "Not just a girl, Tyler. George Westwood's daughter." Tyler's breath caught. George Westwood. A name from his past. A name he hadn't spoken in years. Now it all made sense. The waitress who stood before him with unwavering confidence. The bold statement she made. The fact that she didn't even flinch when he threw money at her feet. Because she didn't need it. Because she had been waiting for this moment. Tyler sucked in a breath, his mind racing. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Already in your office," Richard replied. "Correction. Her office now?" Tyler didn't hesitate. He stormed out of the conference room, pushing through the hallways, ignoring the lingering stares of his employees. He reached his office, the office he built, he ruled, and shoved the doors open with a forceful bang. Inside, sitting calmly in his chair, was Haley Westwood. She didn't look out of place. She didn't look overwhelmed. She looked exactly where she belonged. Her lips curved into a slight smirk. "Mr. Donovan, how nice of you to drop by." Tyler's fists clenched at his sides. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Haley leaned back in the chair, completely unfazed by his fury. "I would think that's obvious. I'm taking back what belongs to my family." Tyler scoffed. "Your family? You're nothing but a spoiled little girl playing dress-up in the real world." Haley's eyes gleamed. "Interesting perspective, tell me. Does it feel real enough now?" Tyler took a threatening step forward. "Undo this." She let out a small, amused laugh. "You really don't get it, do you?" She stood up, walking slowly around the desk as if studying him. "This wasn't your company to begin with. It was built on a betrayal. My father was your partner once, until you stabbed him in the back and took everything for yourself." Tyler's face darkened. "Your father was weak. He didn't have the stomach for business." Haley tilted her head. "And yet, here I am, standing in your office, holding your company in my hands. Funny how things turn out, isn't it?" Tyler felt his blood boil. "I built this empire. You think you can just waltz in here and take it from me? She folded her arms. I don't think I can, I did. He gritted his teeth. This isn't over, I'll find a way to get it back. Haley's smirk didn't fade. Oh, I know you'll try. That's why I've prepared something special for you. Tyler narrowed his eyes. What the hell does that mean? She reached for a folder on the desk and slid it toward him. This is your new contract, Tyler. He snatched it up and flipped through the pages. The more he read, the more his stomach twisted. This is a joke, he hissed. Haley shook her head. Not at all, you see. I could have thrown you out today, humiliated you. But instead, I've decided to give you a job. His grip tightened on the pages. You want me to be a consultant? Haley let out a light laugh. Oh no, that would be too generous. I'm offering you something much better. A chance to learn what real work looks like. Tyler froze as she walked toward him, her gaze sharp. The only position available for you now is as a server in the same restaurant where you humiliated me, she said. And you will take it, or you'll walk out of here with nothing. His pulse pounded in his ears. This was worse than losing everything. This was personal. Haley leaned in slightly. So, what will it be, Mr. Donovan? The weight of the moment pressed on his chest. He had no power, no leverage. His own arrogance had led him to this moment. And for the first time in his life, he had no choice but to obey. Tyler sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the contract in his hands. His jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The words blurred together, but the meaning was clear. Haley Westwood owned him now. His company, his empire, was no longer his. And the only way he could stay involved, even in the smallest capacity, was by accepting a job as a waiter. The thought made his stomach turn. He had spent years clawing his way to the top, crushing competition, ensuring no one ever looked down on him. Now, he was being forced into the very role he had spent his entire career belittling. His phone buzzed. Richard Lane. Tyler ignored the call. He already knew what Richard would say. He'd advise him to take the deal, to swallow his pride and wait for an opportunity to strike back. But Tyler didn't want to wait. He wanted revenge now. He downed a glass of whiskey, the burn barely registering as he thought about Haley. She had played him like a master strategist, waiting for the perfect moment to strip him of everything. And yet, there was something in her eyes, something that went beyond simple business. This wasn't just about winning, it was personal, and Tyler needed to know why. The first day as a waiter the next evening, Tyler stepped into La Belle Époque, no longer as the powerful CEO, but as a lowly employee. The moment he entered, the air shifted. Employees who once trembled at his presence now whispered among themselves. Some smirked. Others watched him with barely concealed amusement. And then there were those who looked at him exactly how he used to look at them, with indifference. As if he didn't matter. His stomach twisted, but he kept his head high. If she thinks she can break me, she's dead wrong. Martha Ramirez, a veteran waitress in her 40s, crossed her arms as she looked him over. Never thought I'd see the day, she muttered. Ethan Morgan, the head chef, leaned against the kitchen doorway, his arms folded. I give him a week, he said, smirking. Maybe 2 if he doesn't cry first. Tyler ignored them both. Instead, his eyes locked onto Haley, who was already watching him from across the restaurant. She wasn't smirking this time. Let's get one thing straight, she said, walking toward him. You're not special anymore. No one here cares about your last name, your bank account, or the fact that you used to own this place. Tyler's jaw tightened. And yet, you went through all this trouble just to put me here. A flicker of something, anger, amusement, or maybe something deeper, crossed her expression before she spoke again. You're going to learn how this world really works, Tyler. And if you quit, you walk away with nothing. Tyler clenched his fists. He wasn't about to let her win. Fine, he said. Let's get this over with. Haley nodded toward Martha. She'll train you. Martha let out a sigh, shaking her head. God help me. A taste of humility within an hour. Tyler realized something horrifying. Waiting tables was actually hard. It wasn't just carrying plates and taking orders. It was fast-paced, stressful, and required a level of patience he didn't possess. By the second hour, he had spilled wine on a customer, messed up orders, and nearly dropped an entire tray of food. By the third hour, his feet ached. His shirt was stained. and the staff was openly laughing at him and the customers. They treated him exactly the way he used to treat his employees. One woman snapped her fingers at him. A businessman barely acknowledged his presence as he rudely waved him off. Another guest mocked his slow service, and a couple of wealthy investors he once did business with recognized him and laughed openly. It was humiliating, and worst of all, Haley saw every second of it. She stood near the bar, arms crossed, observing his struggle. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was simply watching, and that infuriated him more than anything else. The breaking point near the end of his shift. Tyler was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, exhausted and frustrated. Ethan walked in, shaking his head. "You look like hell, Donovan." Tyler ignored him. Ethan let out a low chuckle. "Let me guess. You thought this would be easy, huh?" Tyler's temper snapped. He turned, slamming his tray onto the counter. "I built this place. I ran this empire, and now I'm supposed to, what, serve food like a damn servant." Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he simply shrugged. "Welcome to reality." "Rich boy," Tyler gritted his teeth. "Screw this. I don't need this job." He stormed out of the kitchen, heading straight for the exit. But just as he reached the front door, Haley's voice stopped him. "Walking away already?" Tyler froze. Slowly, he turned around. Haley stood a few feet away, arms still crossed. Expression unreadable. "That's it," she said. "You lasted one shift." Tyler stayed silent. She tilted her head. "I expected more from you, Donovan. I thought you had fight in you." Something inside Tyler twisted. He knew what she was doing. She was pushing him, testing how far he'd go before breaking. And he hated that it was working. He clenched his fists. His pride screamed at him to walk out and never look back. But something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name, made him hesitate, because for the first time in years, Tyler Donovan had something to prove, and not to her, to himself. Gritting his teeth, he turned away from the exit. "I'll see you tomorrow, boss," he muttered before disappearing into the back. And for the first time that night, Haley smiled. Tyler Donovan never thought he'd find himself back here. Yet, here he was, standing in the kitchen of La Belle Époque, dressed in a waiter's uniform, gripping a notepad, and preparing for another night of humiliation. The previous evening had been a disaster. He had fumbled orders, spilled drinks, and endured the mockery of customers and staff alike. He had wanted to walk away, nearly had, but something about Haley's words had stuck with him. "I thought you had fight in you." She was testing him, daring him to fail, and Tyler never failed. That was why he had come back, not because he cared about the job, not because he accepted this as his reality, but because he refused to let her win. Thrown to the wolves, the restaurant was already bustling, filled with high-profile clientele and VIP guests, the kind of people Tyler used to dine with, not serve. "Here," Martha said, handing him a tray stacked with 3 full plates. "Table 7. Tyler barely had time to adjust before she was already moving on. He exhaled sharply and forced himself to focus. Balance, posture, confidence. He could do this. As he approached the table, his stomach twisted. Sitting there, sipping a glass of expensive wine, was James Caldwell, a longtime rival in the business world. The moment Caldwell saw Tyler, his lips curled into a slow, delighted smirk. "Well, well," Caldwell mused, setting his glass down. "I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them, Tyler Donovan. Reduced to a server. My night just got a whole lot more interesting." The other guests at the table snickered, and Tyler felt his grip tighten on the tray, but he forced himself to stay composed. "Your meal, sir," he said. Carefully setting the plates down, Caldwell watched him with mock amusement. "You know, I always thought you were too arrogant for your own good. Guess someone finally put you in your place." Tyler bit his tongue. "Anything else?" he asked, voice controlled. Caldwell grinned. "Actually, yes. You missed a spot." He motioned to an imaginary stain on the tablecloth. "Be a good waiter and wipe it down, will you?" Laughter erupted from the table. Tyler's blood boiled, but he refused to give Caldwell the satisfaction of a reaction. He grabbed a cloth from his pocket and cleaned the non-existent stain. His movements slow and precise. Caldwell chuckled. "Good boy." Tyler straightened, gave a tight-lipped smile, and walked away without another word. The moment he reached the kitchen, he slammed the tray onto the counter. "Easy there, champ," Ethan taunted from across the room. Wouldn't want you to break something again. Tyler exhaled sharply, willing himself to stay calm. He could do this. He had to. A lesson in control. An hour passed, then another. Tyler was getting better, but the customers were relentless. He was insulted, ignored, treated like a nobody. And the worst part, Haley saw everything. She watched from the sidelines, not saying a word. She wasn't mocking him, but she wasn't offering any help either. It infuriated him. During a rare lull, he finally walked up to her. "You enjoying this?" he asked, voice low. Haley raised a brow. "Enjoying what?" Tyler scoffed. "Watching me struggle." She tilted her head. "You think this is about me watching you suffer?" He folded his arms. "Isn't it?" Haley studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said softly. Tyler frowned. "This isn't about revenge, Tyler," she continued. "This is about perspective. You used to be the guy in the suit, barking orders, treating people like they were beneath you. Now, you're the one on the other side of the table." Tyler said nothing. She stepped closer. "Do you know how many times I saw employees walk out of here in tears because of how you treated them?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was calm, controlled. "Do you know how many people lost their jobs because they couldn't meet your impossible standards?" Tyler looked away. "I don't need to humiliate you." "Tyler," she said, "you're doing that all on your own." She left him standing there, her words sinking deep. The tipping point near the end of the night. Tyler was clearing a table when a woman in an expensive dress accidentally knocked over her wine glass, the red liquid splashing onto her designer purse. "Oh my God," she gasped. She turned to Tyler, furious. "Look what you did," she snapped. Tyler blinked. Ma'am, that wasn't me." "Don't argue," she snapped. "This purse is worth more than your entire life." A few heads turned. Customers and staff alike were watching. Haley stood near the bar. Observing closely, Tyler clenched his jaw. This was it. The moment that separated who he used to be from who he was becoming. He could react like the old Tyler. Arrogant, aggressive, defensive, or he could prove something. He took a slow breath. "I apologize, ma'am. Let me clean that for you." The woman scoffed. "Ugh, just get me a manager." A small, mocking laugh came from behind. "Caldwell." Tyler turned just in time to see his old rival smirking. "Wow," Caldwell mused. "The great Tyler Donovan, apologizing like a common worker. I love this new look on you." A few customers chuckled. Tyler could feel Haley's eyes on him. He had a choice. He could storm off, lose control, prove everyone right, or... He smiled. "Of course, sir," he said smoothly. "Would you like another drink while you watch?" Caldwell's smirk faltered. The customers exchanged glances. Some chuckled. Not at Tyler, but at Caldwell for the first time all night. Tyler felt in control, and Haley saw it too. She turned, a small smile playing on her lips. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand. Tyler stood outside the restaurant, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his breath visible in the crisp night air. The evening had been another brutal reminder of his downfall. But something about the way it ended, about the way he had handled himself, felt different. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it wasn't complete humiliation either. For the first time since losing everything, he had controlled the situation instead of letting it control him, and Haley had seen it. She had watched him closely all night, waiting for him to break. But he hadn't. Not completely. He exhaled sharply and turned back toward the building. His jaw set. He wasn't leaving yet. Not until he got answers. Tyler pushed open the door to the now empty restaurant. Most of the staff had already left, except for Haley, who was standing near the bar. Flipping through a stack of papers, she didn't look up when he approached. "You got a second?" he asked, his voice steady. She glanced at the clock on the wall before finally meeting his gaze. "It's late." Tyler ignored that. "Why are you really doing this?" Haley let out a breath, setting the papers down. "We've been over this." "No," he countered. "You've given me the speech, the whole, you deserve this routine. But that's not the full story, is it?" Her eyes flickered with something. Hesitation, maybe even guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You took everything from me, Haley, fine. I get it. You wanted justice for your father, but this..." He gestured around the empty restaurant. "This is personal. You could have kicked me out, ruined my reputation, and walked away. But instead, you made me a waiter in my own empire. That's not just about business. That's something else." Haley's posture stiffened. "You don't get to act like a victim, Tyler." His temper flared. "I'm not. I just want to know the truth." She studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. "You humiliated my father," she said, her voice even but sharp. "You didn't just take the company from him. You destroyed him. You turned him into a joke. He went from being a respected businessman to someone who couldn't walk into a room without people whispering behind his back." Tyler's jaw tightened. He knew George Westwood had taken the loss hard, but he hadn't thought about the aftermath. He hadn't cared. "My father wasn't a weak man," she continued, "but you made sure the world saw him as one. He spent years trying to rebuild himself, trying to move on. And when he finally did, when he finally started something new, you crushed that too." Tyler frowned. "That wasn't personal. That was business." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right, business, just like tonight. When James Caldwell treated you like garbage, that was just business, right?" He clenched his fists. "You don't like being treated like you don't matter, do you?" she asked. "Imagine living like that for years. That's what you did to him." Tyler didn't look away, but he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about winning. He had taken everything from George Westwood and never looked back. "You wanted to hurt me the way I hurt him," he said quietly. Haley didn't deny it. "And is it working?" For the first time, she hesitated. She should have said yes. She should have smirked. Should have told him this was exactly what he deserved. But instead, she looked uncertain, and that told him more than words ever could. "I don't know yet," she admitted finally. Tyler exhaled. He hadn't expected honesty. He had expected smug satisfaction. Triumph. Maybe even anger. But this was something else. "So what happens now?" he asked. Haley shrugged. "That's up to you. You can keep playing the arrogant CEO who lost everything and pretend this is all beneath you. Or you can start figuring out what you want to do next." He studied her for a long moment. "And if I quit?" Her expression hardened. "Then you walk away with nothing." Tyler already knew that. What he didn't know was whether walking away was still his best move. He had spent years building himself into a man who didn't look back. He made calculated choices, never allowed emotions to interfere with his success. But tonight, for the first time, he felt something different. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't just humiliated. He was curious, not just about Haley's motives, but about his own reaction to all of this. "You think I can change?" he asked suddenly. Haley blinked, caught off guard. "I think people only change when they want to." "Do you?" She hesitated. "I guess we'll find out, won't we?" He nodded slowly. Maybe he would. Maybe this was the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Or maybe it was just the beginning. Tyler took a step back. "I'll see you tomorrow." He turned and walked away before she could say anything else. And for the first time since losing everything, he didn't feel like he was running. Tyler had never dreaded going to work before. For years, stepping into his restaurants had been a power move. A reminder to everyone that he was untouchable, that he ruled over them all. Now. Every step toward La Belle Époque felt like a slow walk to the gallows. The morning after his confrontation with Haley, he stood outside the restaurant for a solid minute before finally pushing open the doors. The air inside was thick with the usual morning rush. Staff preparing for another high-end evening, waiters polishing glasses, the scent of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. And the moment they saw him, the whispers began. He had stopped noticing them the night before, but now, in the cold light of day, it was impossible to ignore. "Can you believe he actually came back? Bet you he won't last the week. I give him 2 more shifts before he cracks." Tyler clenched his jaw, keeping his expression neutral as he walked to the back to grab his apron. He wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. The old Tyler would have fired every single one of them for even thinking of mocking him. The new Tyler, well, the new Tyler didn't exist yet. He was just a man who had lost everything and didn't know what the hell he was supposed to do next. "Morning, rich boy." Ethan greeted him from the kitchen doorway, biting into an apple. "You sleep okay after your public humiliation last night?" Tyler didn't take the bait. "You're still talking. That's disappointing." Ethan chuckled. "Look at you. Learning self-control. Baby steps, I guess." Tyler ignored him and headed toward the staff area to start his shift. Haley was already there, speaking with Martha. She didn't acknowledge him immediately, but when she finally did, she studied him for a second before nodding. "Glad to see you came back," she said. Tyler just shrugged. "Wouldn't want to make it too easy for you." Martha snorted. "Let's see if you actually survive the lunch rush first." Hotshot, it turned out. Lunch rushes were hell. Tyler had thought dinner service was bad, but at least that was paced out. Lunch was chaos. Orders flying in every second. Customers demanding immediate attention. Trays being shuffled back and forth so quickly that he nearly lost his footing more than once. By the time he reached his third table, he was already sweating, gripping his notepad so tightly that his knuckles ached. A middle-aged woman with too much jewelry and an air of superiority barely glanced at him as she snapped, "I've been waiting for my drink for 10 minutes. Do you think I have all day?" Tyler gritted his teeth, forcing himself to nod. "Right away, ma'am," he said, turning toward the bar. Martha, who had been watching, smirked. "Look at you. Not snapping at a customer. I'm so proud." "Shut up," Tyler muttered, grabbing the drink and making his way back. The woman barely acknowledged it, waving him off. Finally, Tyler exhaled slowly and moved on. This was torture. This was beneath him. And yet, somewhere deep inside, something nagged at him, because for the first time in his life, he was seeing things from the other side. By the end of the shift, his feet ached, his shirt was damp, and he felt like collapsing. He leaned against the back counter, running a hand through his hair. When Haley approached, "Survived another day," she observed. "Barely. You'll get better?" Tyler let out a dry laugh. "And here I thought you'd be rooting for me to fail?" Haley tilted her head. "If I wanted you to fail, I wouldn't have given you a job." "I want you to learn, Tyler. That's the whole point." He didn't respond right away, because for the first time, he realized that maybe she was serious. Maybe this wasn't just about revenge. Maybe, just maybe, she actually wanted him to understand something. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You think waiting tables is going to change me?" Haley crossed her arms. "I think it's a start. You spent years acting like money made you untouchable. But you're touching reality now, aren't you?" Tyler's jaw tightened. "Spare me the moral lesson." She studied him. "You still think this is just punishment?" "It's not." He frowned. "Then what the hell is it?" "It's perspective," she said simply. "You spent your whole life at the top. You never once looked down and thought about the people carrying you. Now, you don't have a choice but to see them." Tyler hated that her words struck something inside him, because the truth was, she wasn't wrong. He had never cared about the people who worked under him. Not really. They were tools, a means to an end. If one failed, another took their place. Now he was the one being treated like he didn't matter, and it sucked. He rubbed his face, exhausted. "Look, I came back, didn't I? Doesn't that count for something?" Haley tilted her head. "It counts for effort." "That's it." She gave him a knowing smile. "That's more than you've ever given before." Tyler didn't have a response to that, because she was right. For the first time in years, he was making an effort at something he didn't control, and he hated how much it unsettled him. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. Tyler straightened. His body hurt. His ego was bruised, and his pride was in shambles. But for some reason, the words came easily. "Yeah," he said. "See you tomorrow." Haley watched him as he walked out, something unreadable in her eyes. And for the first time since losing everything, Tyler felt like maybe he wasn't completely lost after all. Tyler had barely set foot in Belle Époque when he felt the shift in the air. The staff weren't just whispering anymore. They were watching him, judging, waiting. It had been a week since he started working as a waiter, and while the initial shock of seeing their former boss in a uniform had worn off, there was still an undeniable tension every time he stepped onto the floor. No one had forgotten who he used to be. No one had forgiven him either. And tonight, he was about to learn just how deep those wounds ran. The dinner rush was already in full swing. The restaurant packed with New York's elite. People Tyler once considered equals. Now they barely acknowledged him. He carried a tray of expensive entrees toward table 5, carefully balancing the plates, when a voice stopped him in his tracks. Unbelievable, a familiar voice drawled. Tyler's stomach twisted. At the table sat Preston Hale, a corporate executive Tyler had worked with in the past, a man who, up until a few months ago, had desperately tried to do business with him. Now, Preston was staring at him with a slow, amused smirk, his date barely concealing her delight. "Tyler Donovan," Preston said, shaking his head. "Serving food. Now I've seen everything." Tyler's grip on the tray tightened. "Your steak, sir," he said flatly, setting the plate down. Preston ignored the food, his eyes gleaming with mockery. "Tell me, Donovan, how does it feel, knowing you used to own this place, and now you're, what, cleaning up after people like me?" His date giggled, sipping her wine. Tyler forced his expression to remain blank. "Enjoy your meal." He turned to leave, but Preston wasn't finished. "Hold on," he called, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "I think I need another drink." Tyler didn't react. "Be a good waiter and get me another scotch, neat." The way he said it, like an order, like Tyler was beneath him, made something snap inside him. For years, Tyler had been the one giving orders, treating people like they were nothing but background noise. Now, he was background noise, his fists clenched at his sides. He could feel Haley's eyes on him from across the room. She was watching, waiting, testing him. If he walked away now, he'd prove he was still the same man he had always been. Arrogant, petty, unwilling to face the consequences of his past. But if he stayed, Tyler exhaled slowly. "Right away, sir," he said, his voice even. He turned, walking toward the bar, forcing himself to breathe. He wasn't doing this for Preston. He was doing this because if he wanted to prove, to Haley, to himself, that he wasn't just some entitled businessman who couldn't handle real life, he had to face moments like this head-on, even if it killed him inside. Ethan was already smirking when Tyler reached the bar. "That was fun to watch," the chef commented. "You looked like you were about to throw a punch." Tyler ignored him, focusing on pouring the drink. "Seriously," Ethan continued. "Preston's an ass, but you kinda deserve it, don't you think?" Tyler's jaw tightened, but he didn't snap, because deep down, Ethan was right. He had spent years treating people like disposable chess pieces, never once considering the weight of his actions, and now he was paying for it. Maybe he did deserve it, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. He grabbed Preston's drink and made his way back to the table, carefully setting it down. Preston smirked. "That took long enough." Tyler didn't rise to the bait. "Anything else, sir?" Preston chuckled, clearly disappointed that he wasn't getting a reaction. "Nah, I think I'm good." Tyler nodded and walked away. He wasn't proud, he wasn't angry, he was just exhausted. By the time the shift ended, Tyler was drained. Every muscle in his body ached, and his mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. He had always assumed that power was permanent, that once you reached the top, you never had to worry about falling. But that wasn't true. Power could be taken away in an instant, and when that happened, the people you stepped on along the way, they'd be waiting. He was still lost in thought when he heard a voice behind him. "You handled that better than I expected." Tyler turned to find Haley standing nearby, arms crossed, studying him. "I'm full of surprises," he muttered. Haley raised a brow. "So you didn't feel like throwing his drink in his face?" Tyler smirked, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, I did, but I figured you'd fire me if I did." Haley gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're learning," Tyler frowned. "Learning what, exactly?" Haley studied him for a moment before speaking. "That power isn't about status," she said. "It's about how you treat people. And for the first time in your life, you're seeing what it feels like to be on the other side of the table." Tyler stayed silent, because she was right, again, and that was the part that scared him the most. Haley took a step back. "Get some rest, Donovan. Tomorrow's another day." She walked away, leaving him standing there, lost in his thoughts. He had spent his entire life believing that money and power made him untouchable. But tonight, he had learned that respect wasn't something you could buy. It had to be earned, and he wasn't sure if he had ever really earned it before. As he walked out into the cold night, he found himself wondering, was it too late to start? Tyler had never been a morning person, but something about waking up sore, exhausted, and mentally drained made getting out of bed even worse. His body ached in ways he wasn't used to, not from luxury workouts at exclusive gyms, but from actual labor. He lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, trying to process what his life had become a few months ago. He had been at the top of the world now. He was dragging himself out of bed to wait tables. The absurdity of it made him want to laugh and scream at the same time. But quitting wasn't an option, not because he cared about the job, not even because he cared about Haley's twisted lesson, but because he refused to let her win. So, with a sharp breath, he pushed himself up, showered, dressed, and made his way back to La Belle Époque, ready for whatever fresh humiliation the day would bring. By the time he arrived at the restaurant, the morning staff was already setting up. The air smelled of fresh coffee and baked bread, the soft hum of conversation filling the space. He walked toward the back to grab his apron, but as he passed the bar, he caught sight of something that made him stop. Haley, sitting at a small corner table, going over paperwork, her brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time, he noticed how hard she worked. Not just barking orders or making power plays, but actually running the place. He had assumed she was just enjoying the thrill of his downfall, but watching her now, shoulders tense, eyes scanning numbers and reports, he realized she was doing something he had never done. She was in the trenches, working alongside the people who made this place run. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The morning shift started off rough. Martha had zero patience for him today, shoving a list of things to do into his hands before he could even blink. Tables need setting, cutlery needs polishing, and for the love of God, Donovan, learn how to carry a tray properly before you drop another one. Tyler bit back a response. He was getting better, slowly, but mistakes still happened. By midday, he had almost settled into a rhythm. Then the espresso machine broke, and somehow it became his problem. Donovan, Ethan barked from the kitchen. Fix the damn thing. Tyler stared at him. You want me to fix a coffee machine? Ethan smirked. What? Too complicated for you. Tyler rolled his eyes but crouched down in front of the machine, inspecting it. He wasn't completely useless when it came to technical issues. He had spent enough time in his own restaurants micromanaging his staff to know how things worked. He fiddled with a few buttons, checked the pressure valve, and within minutes, steam hissed as the machine came back to life. Martha blinked. Huh? Guess you're good for something after all. Careful, Tyler muttered. You almost complimented me, she smirked. Don't get used to it. As the day wore on, Tyler began noticing things he had never paid attention to before, like how the kitchen staff worked in perfect synchronization, moving seamlessly through the chaos of orders and plating, like how waiters could read a table's energy in seconds, adjusting their approach based on the mood of the guests, like how Martha had memorized every regular customer's name and preferences, making them feel like VIPs without them even realizing it. He had owned this business for years, but he had never seen it. Not like this. It was humbling and uncomfortable. And maybe just a little fascinating. Later that evening, Haley approached him while he was stacking plates. You did well today, she said. Tyler arched a brow. Did you just give me a compliment? Don't get excited, she replied. You're still terrible at this job, but at least now you're paying attention. Tyler leaned against the counter, studying her. Why do you care if I learn anything? Haley hesitated, then sighed. Because this isn't just about you, Tyler. It's about everyone. You built your empire on the backs of people you never respected. If you ever get the chance to own anything again, I want you to remember what it feels like to be on this side of it. Tyler frowned. You think I'm ever getting another chance? Haley tilted her head. That depends. Are you actually changing? Or are you just playing along until you can figure out how to get back on top? He didn't have an answer to that. And that was the most unsettling part, because for the first time, he wasn't sure which was true. At the end of the night, after the last customer left and the staff began closing up, Tyler found himself standing behind the bar, wiping down counters. It was mindless work, the kind of thing he never would have done before. Now, it was almost peaceful. He didn't notice Haley watching him until she spoke. You know, I didn't expect you to last this long, Tyler snorted. I didn't either. She leaned against the bar. So why are you still here? Tyler thought about that for a moment, Because of pride, maybe. Because he wanted to prove her wrong. Definitely. But there was something else. Something he wasn't ready to admit yet. So instead, he just smirked. Maybe I like the uniform. Haley rolled her eyes. Go home, Donovan. He chuckled, tossing his towel onto the counter. Yeah, see you tomorrow, boss. As he walked out into the cool night air, something strange settled in his chest. For the first time since losing everything, he didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he was actually learning, and that terrified him more than anything else. Tyler was starting to recognize the patterns, the rhythm of the restaurant, the way the kitchen orchestrated every dish like a symphony, the subtle signals between the staff, the quick nods, the exchanged glances that communicated everything without words. He wasn't good at this job yet, not by a long shot, but he wasn't failing miserably anymore. And that, apparently, was a problem for some people. It started with small things. Trays stacked slightly off balance, forcing him to scramble to catch them. Orders mysteriously going missing, making customers impatient. At first, he thought it was just his own incompetence. Then, he noticed the smirks, the glances exchanged behind his back. Ethan, in particular, seemed to be enjoying himself way too much. You're looking tense, Donovan, he said, as Tyler nearly dropped a full tray of wine glasses. First week nerves still getting to you. Tyler exhaled slowly. Just another day in paradise. Ethan chuckled. Careful, you almost sound like a real waiter. Tyler shot him a glare, but didn't engage. That was what Ethan wanted. A reaction. And Tyler wasn't about to give him one. But the petty sabotage that was starting to get old by the middle of the shift. He was frustrated. Every time he started to get comfortable, something went wrong. He set a plate down at a table, only for the customer to frown. This isn't what I ordered. Tyler blinked. What? The woman pushed the plate toward him. I asked for salmon, not steak. Tyler swore he had taken the right order. His eyes flickered toward the kitchen, where Ethan was leaning against the counter, watching with a lazy smirk. Understanding clicked. Ethan had switched the plates on purpose. The smug bastard wanted him to mess up. Tyler clenched his jaw. The old him would have exploded. Humiliated Ethan in front of everyone. The new him. Well, he didn't know who that was yet, but he knew he wasn't playing this game. I apologize, ma'am, he said, his voice even. I'll fix it right away. As he turned toward the kitchen, Haley caught his eye. She had seen everything. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. But her gaze held a simple message. Don't let them break you. Tyler waited. He played along. For the rest of the night, he took every sabotage attempt in stride. The missing orders, the switched tickets, the plates that were mysteriously forgotten. But he was watching, and he learned by the end of the shift, when the last table had been cleared and the staff began winding down. Tyler finally made his move. He walked straight into the kitchen calmly and leaned against the counter where Ethan was cleaning up. You've had your fun, Tyler said. Ethan didn't even look up. I don't know what you're talking about, Tyler smirked. Right, just like it wasn't you who swapped out my orders. Or forgot to tell me about the table switch. Ethan finally looked at him, eyes mocking. Must be tough, huh? Being on the other side of things? Tyler didn't flinch. You want me to quit? Ethan tilted his head. Wouldn't mind? Tyler let out a short laugh. Then you'll be disappointed. Ethan raised a brow. Oh, yeah, Tyler said. Because I'm not going anywhere. Ethan's smirk faded just slightly. I get it, Tyler continued. You want payback? You want me to feel what it's like to be powerless, and trust me, I do. His voice lowered. But here's the thing. I'm still here. Ethan studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked away. Tyler exhaled slowly. That wasn't a win. Not yet. But it was a step forward. Haley approached as he was untying his apron. You didn't take the bait, she said. Tyler glanced at her. You saw what he was doing. She nodded. I wanted to see how you'd handle it. He chuckled dryly. And, she considered for a moment, you didn't explode. That's progress. Tyler rolled his eyes. High praise. Haley smirked. For you, yeah. He shook his head, tossing his apron over a chair. So what now? Haley tilted her head. Now you keep going. You keep showing up. You keep proving that you can handle more than just the easy parts. Tyler exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You know, I'm starting to think you actually want me to succeed. Haley's expression was unreadable. Maybe. Tyler frowned. Why? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a slow breath before finally saying, because if you do change, maybe this whole thing won't have been a waste of time. Tyler didn't know what to say to that. So for once, he stayed silent. He grabbed his coat, heading for the door. But just as he stepped outside, he heard Haley call after him. Hey, Donovan. He turned. Her expression was softer than usual. See you tomorrow. Tyler hesitated, not because he was considering quitting, but because for the first time, he realized he actually wanted to come back. He gave her a small smirk. Yeah, see you tomorrow. And for the first time since all of this started, he meant it. Tyler never thought he'd say this, but the job was getting easier. Not easy. Easier. His feet still ached at the end of every shift. His patience was constantly tested by entitled customers, and Ethan still took every opportunity to mess with him. But something had changed. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was learning. He had stopped thinking like an outsider, and he had started paying attention. It was a Friday night, the busiest night of the week, and the restaurant was packed. Every table was full. The kitchen was moving at a breakneck pace, and the bar was slammed with drink orders. Tyler moved between tables without hesitation, balancing trays, taking orders, even remembering customer preferences without having to check his notepad. Martha noticed. You're not completely useless anymore, she commented as he passed by. Tyler smirked. I'm touched. You should be, she said. A month ago, you were one spill away from being thrown out. Tyler rolled his eyes, but didn't argue, because she was right. Things were going smoothly, too smoothly, which meant something was bound to go wrong, and it did. A large group of high-profile guests had booked a last-minute reservation, and Haley had personally assigned the table to Tyler. Don't screw this up, she told him, handing him the list of orders. Tyler scanned the names and felt his stomach drop. Among them was Nathan Beckett, one of his former business partners, and Beckett wasn't alone. Seated around the table were investors. People Tyler used to negotiate deals with over expensive cigars and whiskey. Now, he was serving them food. Beckett recognized him immediately. Well, well, he said, leaning back in his chair with a slow smile. Tyler Donovan, I almost didn't believe it when I heard the rumors. Tyler kept his expression neutral. Good evening, Mr. Beckett. What can I get for you? The entire table fell silent. They were waiting for him to react, waiting for him to crack. Beckett chuckled. I've got to say, I never expected to see you like this. Waiting tables. That's a hell of a fall from grace. Tyler's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. Your drinks will be right out, he said smoothly, before walking away. Behind him, he heard the quiet murmurs, the chuckles, but he didn't let it get to him. Not this time. At the bar, he grabbed Beckett's drink and paused. He had a choice. He could walk back to that table seething, hating every second of it, or he could own it. He turned, walking back with the same confidence he used to have when closing a business deal. As he set the glass down in front of Beckett, he met his eyes and smirked. Careful with this one, he said. It's expensive. Beckett raised an eyebrow. Are you warning me? Donovan. Tyler's smirk didn't fade. Just making sure you know I still have good taste. A few of the investors laughed, the tension breaking just slightly. Beckett studied him for a long moment before nodding, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Enjoy your meal, Tyler said, turning to leave. And for the first time, he didn't feel like the punchline of the joke. Later that night, after the shift had ended, Haley approached him. You handled yourself well tonight, she said. Tyler wiped his hands on a towel. Didn't give you the meltdown you were expecting. Haley smirked. Maybe I was hoping for a little drama. Tyler chuckled. Sorry to disappoint. She tilted her head. You know, the old you would have thrown a drink in Beckett's face. Tyler leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Yeah, well, the old me didn't have much to lose. Haley studied him for a moment before saying, maybe the new you has something to gain. Tyler hesitated, because for the first time, he wasn't sure if this was just about proving her wrong anymore. Maybe, just maybe, he was actually changing, and that scared him more than losing everything ever did. The breaking point, despite his small personal victory, Tyler still wasn't completely accepted by the staff. That became painfully clear when he overheard a conversation between Martha and Ethan in the break room. "He's lasted longer than I thought," Ethan muttered. Martha scoffed. "Yeah, but does he actually care? Or is this just another game for him?" "Does it matter?" Ethan asked. "He's still the same guy who treated us like dirt for years. I don't care if he suddenly knows how to carry a tray." Tyler felt something twist in his chest, because for the first time he realized it wasn't enough to show up. He needed to prove he had changed. But how? That night, as he walked toward the door, he hesitated. Then, instead of leaving, he turned back and found Haley sitting at a table. "Going over paperwork?" She looked up, surprised. "Forget something." Tyler leaned against the chair across from her. "How do I get them to trust me?" Haley studied him carefully. "You really want to know?" He nodded. She exhaled. "You want people to believe you've changed, Tyler. You have to stop pretending it's enough just to be here." Tyler frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Haley set her pen down. "You're doing the job, yeah, but you're still acting like an outsider. Like this is temporary. People don't trust you because they think the second you get a chance, you'll go right back to who you were." Tyler hesitated. "And what if I won't?" Haley's expression softened slightly. "Then prove it." Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Tyler realized something. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to be seen differently, and that meant he had to do more than just show up. He had to start earning respect for real this time. Tyler had spent his entire life proving people wrong. He built an empire because he refused to be underestimated. He thrived on competition, on proving he was better, smarter, and untouchable. But now, he wasn't trying to prove his power. He was trying to prove that he deserved to be here, and that was a different kind of battle entirely. The restaurant was buzzing with energy that night. Every table was filled. The kitchen was running on overdrive, and the air smelled of seared meats, fresh herbs, and expensive wine. Tyler had never been this focused before. Orders came in, and he took them with efficiency, balancing trays. Remembering preferences and staying ahead of the chaos, he was getting the hang of it. But it wasn't enough, because no matter how well he performed, there was still doubt in the air. The staff watched him like they were waiting for him to fail, and tonight, he was going to change that, halfway through the night. The tension in the kitchen spiked. The executive chef, a tough woman named Carla, slammed her knife onto the cutting board. "We're running out of sea bass!" she barked. Ethan, plating a dish, smirked. "Guess someone forgot to check inventory." Carla glared. "Not funny, Morgan. We have 5 tables with sea bass orders, and we don't have enough to cover them." Tyler was passing through when he caught the panic in Martha's face. "Let me guess," he said, slowing his pace. "The supplier didn't deliver," Carla huffed. "Something like that." Tyler scanned the kitchen. This was bad. A mistake like this in a high-end restaurant. It could tank the entire night. And the worst part, one of the tables waiting on the sea bass was Beckett's table. Tyler clenched his jaw. He knew how this worked. If Beckett didn't get what he ordered, he'd make sure everyone knew about it. This was a problem that couldn't be ignored. So Tyler made a decision. "I'll fix it," he said. Carla frowned. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Tyler grabbed his jacket. "I'll be back in 15 minutes. And before anyone could stop him, he was out the door. It was a gamble. The old Tyler would have just yelled at someone for screwing up, but that wasn't an option anymore. He needed a solution. Fast. He sprinted 2 blocks to Carter's Market, one of the best seafood suppliers in the area. The store was closing in 5 minutes, and Tyler practically barreled through the doors, panting. The owner, a grumpy old man named Frank Carter, raised an eyebrow. "You look like hell." "Donovan?" Yeah! Tyler gasped, hands on his knees. "You still got sea bass?" Frank snorted. "Maybe. Why should I sell it to you?" Tyler straightened, his breathing still uneven. "Because if you don't, Belle Époque's reputation takes a hit, and if that happens, you lose one of your best restaurant clients." Frank studied him. Then, slowly, he walked toward the back and emerged with a fresh stack of sea bass fillets. "That'll cost you," Frank said, smirking. Tyler pulled out his wallet without hesitation. "I don't care," he muttered, handing over his card. Moments later, He was sprinting back to the restaurant with a bag full of the one thing that could save the night. He burst into the kitchen, slightly out of breath. Carla's eyes widened when she saw the bag. "You actually got it," Tyler smirked. "Told you I'd fix it." Carla grabbed the fillets and immediately got to work, calling out new instructions to the line cooks. Ethan watched from the side, his usual smirk gone. "You ran to Carter's Market for this," Tyler shrugged. Seemed faster than waiting for a miracle. Ethan folded his arms, studying him. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't mockery either, and that meant something. The sea bass orders went out without a hitch. Beckett and his table never even knew there had been a problem. The crisis was avoided, and for the first time since he started working here, Tyler felt something different in the air. It wasn't just silence. It wasn't just reluctant tolerance. It was respect. Martha passed him as he wiped down a counter. "Nice save," she muttered. Carla gave him a simple nod. "Not bad, Donovan." Even Ethan, the one person who never gave him an inch, simply said, "Not the worst thing you've done." For Ethan, that was practically a standing ovation. Tyler exhaled. He had done it. For the first time, they didn't see him as the arrogant billionaire who lost everything. They saw him as one of them, and that mattered. Haley found him in the back alley after closing, leaning against the brick wall, taking in the cold night air. "You didn't have to do that," she said, stepping beside him. Tyler didn't look at her. "Yeah, I did." She studied him for a long moment. "You're different." Tyler chuckled. "Don't get all sentimental on me now," Haley smirked. "Not a chance." They stood in silence for a while, the distant hum of the city filling the space between them. Then Haley said something that caught him off guard. "You're earning their trust." Tyler finally looked at her. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't testing him. She meant it. For the first time, Haley Westwood saw him as something other than the man who ruined her father's life. And for the first time, Tyler wasn't sure if that scared him or made him feel something else entirely, something he wasn't ready to name. Yet, Tyler had spent years mastering control. Control over negotiations, control over his employees, control over his own damn image. But lately, he was starting to realize how little control he actually had, because no matter how much progress he made at La Belle Époque, no matter how many small victories he stacked up, there were some people who would never forget who he used to be. And tonight, he was about to face one of them. The night started normally enough. Tyler had begun settling into his role, and for the first time, the tension in the restaurant didn't feel so suffocating. Sure, there were still the occasional glares, the whispers from staff who hadn't quite let go of their resentment, but there was also something new in the air, something that almost felt like acceptance. He wasn't one of them yet, but he was closer than he'd ever been before. And then, he walked in. Tyler was at the bar, drying glasses, when he heard the voice, a voice that made his entire body tense. "You've got to be kidding me." He turned slowly, already knowing who he'd see. Logan Pierce, an old rival, a man Tyler had humiliated more times than he could count. Logan leaned against the bar, his sharp, tailored suit a clear sign that he was still thriving in the world Tyler had been exiled from. And judging by the smirk on his face, he was enjoying this moment far too much. "Tyler Donovan," Logan said, shaking his head. "Wiping glasses at a restaurant you used to own. Now that's a sight I never thought I'd see." Tyler kept his face blank. "What can I get you?" Logan let out a low chuckle, as if this was all some grand joke. "That depends," he said, eyes gleaming. "Can you handle a drink order? Or is that too complicated for you these days?" Tyler ignored the bait. "Whiskey neat?" he guessed. "You always ordered that before." Logan's smirk faltered just slightly, as if annoyed that Tyler wasn't reacting the way he wanted. "Make it a double," Logan said, sitting down. "I'm in the mood to celebrate." Tyler poured the drink calmly, setting it down in front of him. "Celebrating what?" he asked. Logan swirled the glass. The fact that some people know how to hold on to power, while others... He gestured at Tyler's uniform. "Well, you get the picture?" Tyler's grip on the bar tightened, because that right there, was the old version of himself staring back at him. The arrogance, the condescension, the belief that power was permanent. The old Tyler would have ripped Logan apart in seconds. But Tyler wasn't that man anymore. So instead, he simply said, "Enjoy your drink," and walked away. He could feel Logan watching him all night, waiting for him to snap him. And Tyler refused to give him that satisfaction. But the moment of truth came when Logan pushed things too far. It was late in the evening when Logan suddenly raised his voice, looking directly at Haley, who had just passed by. "You must be Haley Westwood," Logan said, smirking. "I've heard all about you." Haley stopped, turning to face him. "And you are?" Logan grinned, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Someone who appreciates a good revenge story. And I have to say, yours is fantastic." Tyler's stomach dropped. Logan was enjoying this, enjoying watching him stand there, powerless, while he stirred the pot. Logan continued, "taking over Donovan's empire, making him work for you. That's the kind of poetic justice you don't see every day." Haley's expression didn't change. "I don't remember asking for your opinion." Logan let out a mocking laugh. "Come on, don't be shy. You got exactly what you wanted, didn't you?" He leaned forward. "Tell me, though, what's your endgame? Keeping him here forever? Making sure he never gets back on his feet?" Tyler's blood boiled, not because of what Logan was saying, but because he could see something flicker in Haley's eyes. Doubt. She wasn't sure. And for the first time, Tyler realized, maybe she never had an endgame. Maybe she had never expected him to last this long. Maybe she had never considered what came next. Logan smirked. "You know what I think. I think you're afraid." Haley's jaw tightened. "I think you're afraid that if you let him go, he'll come back stronger than before," Logan continued. "And you won't have control anymore." Silence. "And then, that's enough." The words came from Tyler. Logan turned, amused. "Oh, did I touch a nerve?" Tyler stepped forward. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" Logan raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." Tyler shook his head, exhaling. "You don't actually care about what happened to me. You're just here to make yourself feel better." Logan smirked. "And what if I am?" Tyler tilted his head. "Then I guess that means you're not as secure as you like to pretend." Logan's expression darkened, just slightly. But Tyler wasn't finished. "You can stand here all night trying to rub it in," he said. "You can remind me of everything I lost, but the difference between us." He smiled. "I'm learning from my mistakes," Logan scoffed. "Right. You really believe that?" Tyler didn't hesitate. "Yeah," he said. "I do." For the first time, Logan had nothing to say. He drained the rest of his whiskey, set the glass down, and stood. "Well," he said, "this was fun." He looked at Haley one last time. "Think about what I said," he told her. "Because sooner or later you're going to have to decide what you really want." And then, he left. The silence between Tyler and Haley stretched. He turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded, but something in her expression was off. Logan's words had gotten to her. "Haley," Tyler said carefully. "Was he right?" She looked at him. "Are you afraid to let me go?" She hesitated, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer. Tyler had never seen Haley look uncertain before. She was always composed, always in control. But now, after Logan's words had settled between them, there was something different in her eyes, and he hated that it was him asking the question. "Are you afraid to let me go?" Haley's silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then, finally, "I don't know," she admitted. It wasn't the answer he had expected, and it wasn't one he was ready to deal with. The next morning, Tyler showed up at La Belle Époque earlier than usual. Not because he had to, because he needed to think. Haley's words had been playing on a loop in his mind since last night, and no matter how much he tried to ignore them, they wouldn't leave him alone. She didn't know if she wanted him to stay. She didn't know if she was ready to let him leave, and worst of all, neither did he. He was polishing glasses behind the bar when Martha walked in, raising an eyebrow. "You're here early," she observed. Tyler shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." Martha studied him for a moment. "Something happened," Tyler debated answering. Then, against his better judgment, he said, "Logan Pierce showed up last night." Martha made a face. "Ugh, that guy's an ass." "Yeah, well, he got into Haley's head." Martha tilted her head. "How so?" Tyler exhaled. "He made her question whether she actually wants me to leave when this is over." Martha leaned against the bar, arms crossed. "And that bothers you because—" Tyler frowned. "Because it's a ridiculous question." Martha smirked. Is it? Tyler shot her a look. What the hell does that mean? Martha didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him with the same knowing expression she always had when she was about to say something that would piss him off. Look, Donovan, she said. You've changed, whether you want to admit it or not. You're not the same guy who walked in here thinking this job was beneath him. Tyler opened his mouth to argue, but Martha cut him off. And, she continued, maybe Haley's starting to see that too. That shut him up. Because the truth was, he had been so focused on proving himself that he hadn't stopped to consider what happened next. What happened when this was over? Would he walk away and go back to the life he had before? Or had he already crossed a line he couldn't come back from? The dinner shift started off smooth. Tyler was focused, running the floor like he had been doing this his whole life. At some point, he caught Haley watching him. She wasn't testing him. She wasn't waiting for him to fail. She was just watching. And for the first time, it made him feel unsteady. Because what if Martha was right? What if Haley wasn't just questioning whether she wanted him to stay? What if he was too? The breaking point came later that night. It started with a customer complaint. A man at table 9 had barely touched his meal. And when Tyler checked in, the guy crossed his arms and gave him a cold glare. "This steak is overcooked," the man said. Tyler frowned. "I can get you a new one, sir," the man scoffed. "I shouldn't have to wait twice for a dish that should have been right the first time." Tyler kept his voice level. "I understand, and I apologize. I'll take care of it right away." But the man wasn't finished. He looked Tyler up and down, smirking. "You know," he said, "I thought you looked familiar. You used to be someone, didn't you?" Tyler froze, and just like that, every eye in the restaurant was on him. "I remember now," the man continued, voice dripping with amusement. "Tyler Donovan, the guy who had it all, until he lost it." A few whispers went through the room, and Tyler felt it, that familiar burn of humiliation. For a moment, he flashed back to that night when Haley had taken everything from him, the way the world had laughed, the way people had enjoyed watching him fall. He could feel old instincts kicking in, the need to snap back, to humiliate this guy just as badly. But then, something else happened. He looked across the room and saw Haley watching him. And suddenly everything clicked. This was the moment where he had to decide who he really was now. So instead of giving in to the anger, he took a slow breath. "Would you like me to replace your steak, sir?" he asked, voice calm. The man smirked. "No, I'd rather watch you squirm." Tyler didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. "Then I hope you enjoy the show." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving the man sitting there, stunned. Back in the kitchen, Ethan was watching. "You didn't lose it," Ethan said, arms crossed. Tyler grabbed a towel, wiping his hands. "Nope." Ethan studied him for a moment before shaking his head. "Guess I owe Martha $20. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "You bet on me losing it," Ethan smirked. "Hell yeah," Tyler laughed, shaking his head. And for the first time, he realized something. This place wasn't just a punishment anymore. It had become something else entirely, and he had no idea what that meant. At the end of the night, as he was pulling off his apron, Haley walked over. "You handled that well," she said. Tyler shrugged. "Would have been easier to just punch the guy." Haley smirked. "But you didn't." "Nope." She hesitated, then said, "Martha thinks you're different now." Tyler looked at her. "And what do you think?" Haley didn't answer right away, but when she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I don't know what to do with you anymore." Tyler's chest tightened, because neither did he. And that was the scariest part of all. Tyler had always thought that clarity came in a single, defining moment, like a sudden light switch, illuminating everything at once. But he was starting to realize that change didn't work that way. It wasn't an explosion. It was a slow burn, a series of moments, piling up one by one, until suddenly, you weren't the same person anymore. And the scariest part, he wasn't sure when it had happened. All he knew was that when Haley looked at him now, she didn't just see the man who had ruined her father. And when he looked at her, he didn't just see the woman who had taken everything from him. And that was a problem, because the lines they had drawn between them, they were starting to blur. The night started off like any other. The restaurant was packed, the staff was buzzing with energy, and Tyler was in control of the floor, not just surviving, thriving. He didn't need to check the menu anymore. He could recite the specials from memory. He knew which customers were impatient, which ones preferred personal attention, which ones wanted to be left alone. Somewhere along the way, the job had become second nature, and people were noticing. Even Ethan had stopped taking shots at him. Martha barely gave him hell anymore. It wasn't just about doing the job well. It was the fact that he wasn't faking it anymore. And that was the most unexpected thing of all. Haley watched him from the bar, sipping her drink, eyes narrowed in quiet observation. She didn't say anything, didn't interrupt. She just watched. And Tyler knew exactly why. She was trying to figure out what this meant. For him, for her, for the entire damn situation they had created. Because no matter how much they ignored it, there was a simple, undeniable truth staring them both in the face. This wasn't punishment anymore. This was something else entirely, and neither of them knew what the hell to do about it. The turning point came near the end of the shift. It started with a simple mistake. A waiter, one of the newer guys, nervous and fidgety, misread an order and sent a shellfish dish to the wrong table. Normally, it wouldn't have been a big deal, except this time, the customer was allergic. Tyler was across the room when he heard the sharp intake of breath, the clatter of silverware against porcelain. The man at table 7 was turning red, struggling to breathe. Tyler didn't think, didn't hesitate. He moved fast, rushing to the man's side, catching his shoulders before he collapsed against the table. "Does he have an EpiPen?" Tyler barked to the woman sitting next to him. She was panicked, shaking. I don't know." Tyler scanned the restaurant. Then Haley's voice rang out. "Back room," she shouted. "Top shelf, first aid kit." Tyler was already moving. He sprinted past the kitchen, throwing open the supply cabinet, grabbing the pen without thinking. By the time he got back, the man was wheezing, his body starting to shake. Tyler kneeled beside him, steady hands working fast, uncapping the pen, pressing it into his thigh. The man jerked, then slowly, his breathing started to even out. A minute passed, then another, and finally, he was okay. The entire restaurant had fallen silent. Every single person had stopped what they were doing, watching, and then the customer's wife let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Tyler just nodded, standing back up. But when he turned, he caught Haley staring at him, like she was seeing him for the first time, like something had just clicked into place. And in that moment, Tyler knew, whatever this was between them, it had just changed. The restaurant staff was buzzing after closing. The story of what had happened spread fast, and by the time they finished cleaning up, it had turned into legend. "Did you see how fast he moved?" one of the waiters whispered. "Martha, you owe me $50, Ethan muttered. Martha groaned. "Damn it, I really thought he'd freeze up." Tyler rolled his eyes, but he couldn't ignore the shift in the air. This wasn't just respect anymore. It was something deeper. It was trust. And for the first time, he realized he actually cared about that. Later that night, as he was pulling off his apron, Haley walked over. She didn't speak right away, just stood there watching him. "You didn't hesitate," she finally said. Tyler frowned. "You sound surprised." "I am." He studied her. "Why?" Haley exhaled. "Because the Tyler Donovan I knew wouldn't have lifted a finger unless there was something in it for him." Tyler tilted his head. "Maybe you didn't know me as well as you thought." She let out a quiet laugh. "Maybe." Silence stretched between them. Then Haley said something that stopped him cold. "You don't belong here anymore." Tyler's stomach tightened. "What?" Haley met his gaze. "You don't belong in this restaurant, not as a waiter. Not anymore." For a moment, he didn't know what to say, because for months, this place had been the only thing keeping him from falling apart. And now, Haley, the woman who had put him here in the first place, was telling him it was time to leave. "You said I had to prove myself," he said carefully. Haley nodded. "And you did." Tyler clenched his jaw. "So what happens now?" Haley hesitated. And then, "I don't know." The honesty in her voice hit him like a brick, because that was the truth, wasn't it? Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had planned for what came next. And now, standing here in the quiet aftermath of something they couldn't ignore, they were both realizing this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was something else entirely, and neither of them knew how to stop it. For the first time since all of this had started, Tyler felt lost. Not because he had failed, not because he had something to prove, but because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what came next. He had spent months thinking this was just temporary, that he was simply biding his time, waiting for the right opportunity to take his life back. But now, the idea of walking away felt like tearing himself from something he wasn't ready to lose. And that scared him more than anything else ever had. Tyler barely slept that night. He tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling of his apartment, replaying Haley's words over and over in his head. "You don't belong in this restaurant. Not as a waiter. Not anymore." That was supposed to be a victory, wasn't it? She'd been waiting for him to fail. Instead, he had earned his place. And now, instead of kicking him out, she was telling him he was too good to stay. So why didn't it feel like a win? Why did it feel like the ground beneath him had been ripped away? Why did it feel like he wasn't ready to leave? By the time morning came, Tyler had made a decision. He wasn't going to spend the day sitting in his apartment, overthinking. He wasn't going to let himself spiral. So instead, he did the only thing that made sense. He went to work. La Belle Époque wasn't even open yet. When Tyler stepped inside, the morning prep team was just arriving, the scent of fresh bread and coffee filling the air. The restaurant was quiet, a stark contrast to the usual chaos of the dinner rush. It felt strangely calming, like a place he actually belonged. He hadn't expected that. And yet, here he was. He found Haley in her office, already buried in paperwork. She looked up when he knocked on the doorframe. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "You're here early," Haley said. Tyler shrugged, stepping inside. "So are you." She smirked, but it was tired. "I own the place. What's your excuse?" Tyler hesitated. Then, finally, he sat down across from her. "What happens now?" Haley leaned back in her chair, studying him. "That depends," she said. "On what?" Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "On you." Tyler froze, because for months, this had been her game, her rules, her punishment. But now she was putting the next move in his hands. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. The dinner shift that night was busier than usual. Reservations were stacked, the kitchen was overwhelmed, and the staff was pushing to keep up. It should have been stressful, but for some reason, Tyler felt calm, because for the first time, he wasn't questioning why he was here. He wasn't counting down the days until he could walk away. He was just doing the job. And maybe he actually liked it. The night passed in a blur. At some point, Tyler caught Haley watching him. She wasn't testing him anymore. She wasn't waiting for him to fail. She was just watching. And that realization hit him harder than he expected. Because if Haley had finally stopped seeing him as the man who destroyed her father, then who the hell was he now? At the end of the night, when the last table had been cleared and the staff had begun cleaning up, Tyler found himself gravitating toward Haley's office again. She wasn't there. Instead, he found her standing at the bar, nursing a drink. Lost in thought for a moment, he just watched her, the way she rested her elbows against the counter, the way her fingers toyed with the rim of the glass. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had been carrying too much weight for too long. And before he could stop himself, he said, "Are you okay?" Haley blinked, as if pulled from her thoughts. Then, after a beat, "I don't know," she admitted. Tyler hesitated. Then, carefully, he sat down beside her. "That makes two of us." Haley huffed a quiet laugh. "That's a first." Tyler smirked. "Don't get used to it." Silence stretched between them. Then, "I want to stay," he said. Haley's head snapped toward him. "What?" Tyler exhaled. "I don't want to leave. Not yet." Haley stared at him, completely thrown off guard. "You're serious?" Tyler nodded. "I know what you said," he continued. "I know you think I don't belong here anymore. But the thing is," he hesitated. Then, finally, he admitted, "I don't know where else I do belong." Haley's expression softened, and for the first time, Tyler saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Not victory, not satisfaction. Something else. Something she wasn't ready to name. And maybe neither was he. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This wasn't just about proving himself. This was something else entirely. Something neither of them knew how to walk away from. And for the first time since all of this started, Tyler wasn't sure if he wanted to. Tyler had spent his entire life chasing power, control, and dominance. He built an empire from nothing, convinced that money made the man, that respect could be bought, that fear was the best way to stay on top. But standing here, in the quiet, dimly lit bar of La Belle Époque, watching Hayley Westwood process the fact that he wanted to stay, for the first time, he realized how wrong he had been all along, because this wasn't about power anymore. This was about belonging, and he had never belonged anywhere quite like this. Hayley didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at him, as if trying to figure him out. Tyler didn't blame her. Hell, he was still figuring himself out too. Finally, she exhaled, setting her drink down with a soft clink against the glass counter. "You really want to stay?" she asked, her voice quiet. Tyler nodded. "Yeah." Hayley studied him. "Why?" Tyler hesitated. He could have given her a dozen logical reasons. That he liked the work. That he wasn't done proving himself. That he didn't have anything else waiting for him out there. But none of those were the real reason. So instead, he met her gaze and said, "Because I don't want to go back to who I was." Hayley's lips parted slightly, surprised. And that's when Tyler knew. He had finally said something that she wasn't expecting. The next few days were different. People started treating him differently. Not just like a waiter, not just like the former billionaire forced into a new life, like someone who actually belonged here. Ethan didn't throw sarcastic comments his way anymore. Martha actually let him drink coffee from the break room machine instead of telling him it was reserved for real employees. And Hayley started looking at him like she wasn't sure what the hell to do with him anymore, which, considering their history, made perfect sense, because when this started, he had been the enemy. Now, he wasn't so sure what they were to each other, and neither was she. But not everyone was happy about his decision. Word spread fast that Tyler Donovan wasn't leaving. Some people supported it. Others, like Preston Hale, had a serious problem with it. Preston showed up on a Thursday night, his usual smug expression in place as he slid into a seat at the bar. Well, he said, smirking. Still playing dress-up. "I see." Tyler grabbed a glass, pouring him his usual drink without a word. Preston raised an eyebrow. No snappy comeback. No threats to throw me out. Tyler slid the glass in front of him. "Not worth my energy." Preston chuckled, shaking his head. "Wow. Look at you. The mighty Tyler Donovan." Humbled at last. Tyler didn't react. But Hayley, she did. She walked up behind Tyler, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're in my restaurant," she told Preston. "So if you're here to amuse yourself at Tyler's expense, you can leave." Preston smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Relax, Westwood. I'm just here to see how far the mighty have fallen." Hayley's jaw tightened. "He hasn't fallen. He's just changed." Tyler turned slightly, eyes flickering to her, because that was the first time she had ever acknowledged it, and it meant something. Something big. Preston scoffed, setting his glass down. "People like him don't change." Tyler finally looked at him, and instead of anger, instead of the urge to prove something, he just felt pity, because Preston still believed that power was the only thing that mattered. And Tyler had learned that real power came from something else entirely. He let out a breath and said simply, "Then maybe you never really knew me at all." Preston frowned, clearly thrown off. And Hayley smiled, just a little. And that was worth more than every cent he had ever made in his past life. That night, after the restaurant had closed, Tyler and Hayley sat outside in the cool air, neither of them speaking for a while. Then, "You defended me today," Tyler said. Hayley sighed, rubbing her temples. "Don't get used to it," Tyler smirked. "Too late?" She glanced at him, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "You like it," he shot back. Hayley didn't answer. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and then, after a beat, "You don't owe me anything, you know," she said softly. Tyler frowned. "What?" Hayley exhaled. "This. Staying here, working here. You don't have to do it just because of what happened between us? Tyler didn't hesitate. I'm not. Haley's breath hitched. Then why are you still here? She asked, her voice almost uncertain. Tyler leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. Because I want to be. Silence stretched between them, and for the first time, there was nothing left between them but the truth. Not revenge, not resentment, just two people who had walked through hell and come out the other side, completely different than when they started. And neither of them knew what came next. But maybe that was okay. Maybe for the first time in his life, Tyler Donovan didn't need all the answers, because he had found something more valuable than power. He had found something real, and for the first time, that was enough. A month later, a customer at Belle Époque waved Tyler over, glancing at his name tag with a confused expression. You look familiar, the man said, narrowing his eyes. Didn't you used to be somebody? Tyler smirked, setting down the man's drink. Nah, he said. I think I finally am. From across the room, Haley watched him, shaking her head and smiling, because somehow, against all odds, they had both ended up exactly where they were supposed to be, together.